Want to be in the know on all things cannabis? You're in the right place. Regulations, growing, running the business.
I need a dollar.
Welcome to the $1 Pound Podcast. Here are your hosts, industry professionals Ryan and Joey.
Welcome to another episode of the $1 Pound Show. Today we have a very special guest. He has been fighting the good fight here in Monterey County for many, many years. He was known as the go-to cannabis attorney for many, many years here, and he still is in many senses. We have Richard Rosen with us. Richard, how are you doing today?
I'm doing okay.
Thanks for having us, and thanks for taking the time to sit down with us and chat. For people who don't know you, you are basically a retired attorney. I believe you were a public offender for a while in the 70s, and you eventually became a cannabis attorney
Right.
here in Monterey County. So for many, many years, you basically represented people in court, whether it was a delivery service or the dispensary or just individual rights. Kind of tell us about what it was like going from being a public offender into cannabis.
So I started here as a public defender in 1977, and there were no dispensaries, no delivery services, but there were a lot of people growing in Big Sur and Cushao and Carmel Valley, and there were within a few years there were some very big raids. The sheriff's department ramped up what they were doing. There was a lot of money for aerial surveillance. They had fixed-wing aircraft, and they had helicopters flying over looking for pot, and people were getting bolder and bolder each year, growing. And on the hillsides, they were growing dozens of plants, and the sheriffs would reconnoiter during the summer, waiting for, these were all outdoor grows, and they would wait until just before harvest. So they'd wait till August, September, October, and then start raids. And these were large military type operations. I think they were the largest operations that I ever saw coming in, the largest number of personnel involved. Monterey County was really on the front of the war on drugs. I became involved as a public defender. I was assigned to represent people who were busted, and as a pot smoker myself, I was sympathetic, and I knew some of these people. We lived out here in Carmel Valley, so it became a natural thing to get involved in. At one point, I was contacted by the Normal Legal Committee, and they asked me to speak on cultivation search warrants based on aerial surveillance. And at that time, the question was, when you fly over an airplane at 3,000 feet, how can you tell that what you're looking at is a pot plant rather than a tomato plant? Mm-hmm. So we got into the different colors and the different indicators that went on. But I got involved with the Normal Legal Committee at that point when I was a public defender, along with Mel Grimes, who wasn't a public defender but was also active in the fight, and I stayed active with them up till now. In 1982, I left the public defender's office and I went into private practice, but I continued representing a lot of pot growers. There was a lawyer who represented a lot of the pot growers, and he lived out in Cushao, and his name was Floyd Silliman, and right around 1982, the time that I went into private practice, he fell out of private practice. He didn't retire, but he moved out of the area. And so there were a lot of his clients who needed a lawyer, and I picked up the slack for a lot of those cases.
Now, when you going even further back, when you decided to become an attorney, did you have any idea that you would eventually focus on cannabis? Was that the plan from the beginning, or it just kind of happened that way?
No, that wasn't really the plan. I was excited about doing trial work and learning the skills to be a trial lawyer. And at that point, I wasn't really thinking about what I was ready for all crimes, rape, robbery, murder, whatever it is. Let me have it.
Gotcha.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. But it did, circumstances put marijuana on the front burner.
And so now, fast forward all the way to today, we have Monterey County, which is quickly becoming, in so many ways, a mecca for cannabis production legally. It kind of always has been in the shadows in a way. But now it's becoming legal and regulated, and we're going through what it's like to go through a use permit with Monterey County. And it seems that, law enforcement's always a concern, but nowadays even more so, it's code enforcement that is going to get you with a lot of these things you're doing. What is it like for you to go from, those days you just talked about to actually seeing this today? It's got to be pretty insane.
First of all, it's amazing to see that now everything is legal, or most things are legal. I had that experience once before. I also, as a public defender, represented midwives who delivered babies in home births, and this was in the 70s and the 80s, and it was strictly illegal practice, but Monterey County and Santa Cruz County were really hotbeds of midwifery. And I got involved with defending a lot of these cases. There was a leading Supreme Court case at the time where the Supreme Court ruled 7-0 that delivering babies was practicing medicine, and you couldn't do it without a medical license. So that was a unanimous decision. We didn't think it would ever be legal. 15 years down the line, California became the first state to license midwifery. And then a few years after that, California became the first state to legalize medical marijuana. So, but it's still amazing to see that transition. I talked to my brother-in-law in Ohio, and he shakes his head when I tell him what's going on here.
Right.
But what I can see in the connection between the fight that I was fighting into the question of code enforcement is this: you still see the influence of law enforcement and the war on drugs mentality brought to bear in code enforcement, in the creation of the codes, in the structure of the codes. The police have a lot of influence and exert it. A lot of it wrongfully, a lot of it like the original law enforcement position that was taken when marijuana was declared illegal at a federal level in the 1930s. It was not based on any science or any data. They made this stuff up, and they're still making stuff up. And when I talk to people, part of the message that I try to get across is that you have to be very, very careful listening to the advice of the police, because historically they've been lying to you about what's going on, and they're continuing to lie to you. So, for instance, the first thing that happened in the 1930s was they created this story with no basis in fact that the use of marijuana caused people to act violently and commit crimes. and they're still trying to do that. They're still trying to sell that narrative, and in terms of code enforcement, they're using that as an argument for limiting where it can be done, limiting where people can smoke, that they can't smoke in public, limiting where people can grow for their personal use, and tightening up the security requirements for the commercial growers.
Right.
Yeah.
I mean, and one thing that's, kind of hits home to you in a way, because like you mentioned, being out in the Carmel Valley area, a lot of those guys so far have got the short end of the stick when it comes to all this getting regulated. It's really only the big, huge greenhouse operations in South County and Southern Salinas that are allowed to participate right now. And a lot of people are concerned with that. A lot of people out here, they've been concerned for years, obviously, just because it's kind of the nature of what they're doing. But they're even more concerned now because they feel that the money from these large grows in Southern Salinas is going to fund them being, dealt with by law enforcement, so to speak.
Right.
Getting a visit from law enforcement. And I think that kind of goes into what you said about it not having too much of a basis on facts or data. It's kind of just, we didn't want to go with outdoor grows because we didn't want to, whether it was like we didn't want to deal with the EIR or we just don't think it's safe. It wasn't necessarily fact-based. It was fear-based.
It was, and it continues to be fear-based. Yeah.
Right. So, I mean, what would you say, or what advice, if any, could you give to people that are currently like out in this area, Big Sur, Carmel Valley, that have been growing and are growing? Is there anything that they could or should do?
So the state of California, in enacting the laws that permit medical marijuana and recreational marijuana, have carved out permission for the local governments, the counties and the incorporated cities, to add an additional layer of regulation. And that's really the problem that we're facing. The state regulations are not that bad. The problems are really for us at the county level, for those of us who live in the unincorporated portions of the county, which is most of the county. And these rules are made separately in the incorporated cities in Monterey and Marina and those cities. So I think it's a matter of trying to keep up political pressure on the people who run the counties and the cities, on the board of supervisors, on the city council members.
Right.
Right. Because they're going to be doing it, and they are listening at all times to what the police are saying, and they're listening to what their staff is saying. Man, when I say their staff, this is really people's eyes glaze over when they think about administrative reports in the League of California Cities. But these are the organizations that feed information into cities and counties on how to regulate it. And what a lot of people don't realize is that the League of California Cities and other such organizations are very, very closely aligned with law enforcement. And they're feeding the law enforcement lies back to the cities and the counties who are now regulating. So that's why a lot of the cities and counties are just flat out prohibiting any type of cannabis activity when they can, and strictly limiting it
Right.
when they permit it. Yeah.
Yeah, so for people who don't know, in Monterey County, they regulated it, but they don't allow outdoor cultivation.
Right.
Hopefully we convince them to allow that later down the line. And they also don't allow for the zones that Carmel Valley and Big Sur currently are in. And then also there's the factor of the Coastal Commission. Some of these areas are close to the coast, and they have to have a Coastal Commission basically come in and okay the use, or at least be involved in the process, which is added regulation. So that's what really complicates all of that. from Ryan and my perspective, we had a lot of wins as Monterey County normal, but those things that I was just talking about were kind of losses or things that still need to be addressed, because the reality is a majority of the people in Monterey County for years traditionally were outdoor growers, and a majority of them were in this area that we're speaking of, Karma Valley, Big Sur. I mean, there's even a strain called Big Sur Holy Bud. Where do you think that was originated from? So it's really unfortunate to see the regulations create an environment where people who have really been on the forefront are still not being treated right, or still don't have an opportunity to become compliant. And it's kind of a nature, I guess, of how it works. Is it possible, in your opinion, to create and regulate and repeal federal cannabis and state law without creating big marijuana?
When you repeal the law, the prohibition laws, you turn it over gradually, eventually, to the free market. And the free market pressure is going to be ruled by their own forces, and there's an economy of scale that, in the long run, definitely favors big anything. I don't think it's going to end up being completely controlled by big. I guess the best parallel is big tobacco. There's no little tobacco out there, very little tobacco out there, but we're not there now, because the big tobacco is not in it, because the resistance from the federal government. Publicly traded companies are not getting involved at this point, but they're sure interested, and they will be eventually. But even at a local level, what we're seeing is that the county has permitted a greenhouse operation for Harborside, and they've got 50,000 square feet going, and planning to get much bigger. And they seem to be very well connected and protected by local law enforcement. Not specifically by law enforcement, by local politicians. This is an ag business county, Monterey County. It has been for a long time, and it was. I think what really turned the corner for Monterey County was you saw all these farmers saw an opportunity to make a lot of money and wanted to get in on it. It was as simple as that. These were, by the way, guys who have historically been opposed to marijuana in every way, shape, and form. But when they saw an opportunity to make a buck, they wanted in.
Yeah. I mean, it's an interesting question to ask. I think you're totally right. When you open it up to the free market, that's just the nature of the beast, really. That's just what kind of happens. Luckily, for people who aren't familiar with, at the state level, they did add a specialty cottage license that goes up to 2,500 square feet. That's meant to accommodate the small grower who's maybe not ready to do 5, 10, 22,000 square feet, which was encouraging to see. But then to your point, too, it comes down to the locality and whether or not they want to allow that specific license type in their county or their city, which so far Monterey County is probably going to stick with the rules they have, at least for a little bit while longer before they readdress the ordinance.
Yeah. So, and the other thing that's going on is that the California regulations call for testing of the bud to see if there are any pollutants, pesticides, poisons, the types of things that come when you grow commercially. And these are much more prevalent on indoor grows than on outdoor grows. I think there's a much higher use of pesticides and chemicals in indoor grows. The testing regulations are not in effect yet. It's my understanding that the latest reconciliation bill proposed to give them more time because they could see that they were aiming for everything to go into effect January 1st, 2018, 6 months from now. 5 months from now. But they realized that there aren't enough testing laboratories, and they don't have the testing rules in place. And the rumor is that if they did test what's on the market now for purity, that 90% of it would fail.
Which is completely true. I mean, we've seen that for people that attend festivals and High Times Cups. There's, the past couple of years, it's been very common for the contest to test the entries, and not just for THC, but now for mold and pesticides and residual solvents for concentrates. I remember, I think it was 2 or 3 years ago, there was a cup that was specifically for concentrates, and a lot of people didn't know their product was going to be tested, and a lot of people came up high in pentane. And now pentane was a big topic, and people are like, what is this? What is this pentane? And it's just something that was probably always around, but nobody really knew because nobody tested any of the product. Or if they did, it was just about the THC. How stoned can you get off of it, not necessarily how clean or pure or what is the terpene profile. So I think that's going to be really interesting.
Or how much pentene or benzene are you
inhaling?
Ingesting in the whole thing. So maybe that creates a larger opportunity for outdoor growing. Because it's cleaner growing, or it can be cleaner growing. It has been cleaner growing,
right,
certainly, than indoor growing.
As far as all the arguments that we make for why it should be allowed to grow outside, and considering the number of people that have been doing it here historically for so long, as you brought up earlier, what do you think the likelihood of it actually turning on for outdoor grows over the course of the next year? And granted, I mean, in Sidelines, we're obviously trying to make political moves to help ensure that happens in a timely fashion. But where do you realistically imagine it's going to turn on for this county when it comes to outdoor grows?
Yeah, so I see law enforcement fighting to their last breath against outdoor grows.
By the way, jump back real quick. What is the history, in your opinion, as far as the sheriffs in this county and the district attorneys? Like, how has that relationship played out? Because from my point of view, it hasn't exactly looked like they've liked this coming at all. They've been extremely resistant, like you're saying here. So historically, like the big points here.
Well, Monterey County has been the on the forefront of the war on drugs, and so through mainly the sheriff's office, they have fought against outdoor grows since the 60s and 70s, and they've had extra funding for it. They've had their largest operations. They're committed. Everything in their history makes them want to continue that fight. And I see them as continuing that fight. And they also have the belief that it's easier to control in these greenhouse settings, where they know where they are, and they're regulated. Of course, what they're ignoring is that when they make it impossible for people to get a permit and legally grow outdoors, people do it illegally. So you have a continuing black market, gray market growing operation.
I heard some stories that previous sheriffs, for example, some of their family members had raids and stuff that actually happened on their property. Something along those lines. Did you ever hear about that?
That they had
it was like
family
a sheriff's
members
son or something was actually like growing in the back, and they got raided, and they came busting in on that.
Sheriff Miller's son had some drug problems. I don't remember it as him being involved in specifically in cannabis. But let me tell you something about the hypocrisy of law enforcement. I was attending a city council meeting in the city of Monterey 5 years ago or so, and one of the city council members is a retired police officer, and I was attending because they were considering allowing dispensaries in the city of Monterey. And he got up and made the speech, and he said, I'm not against medical marijuana. In fact, I believe in medical marijuana, and the reason is because I have a very close family member who is battling cancer, and the only relief she can get from her symptoms and from chemotherapy is from marijuana. And as a career law enforcement person, it was very weird for me, but I went out and got her marijuana. But I'll be goddamned if I'm going to let the city of Monterey legalize a dispensary.
Really?
Yeah. So it's okay for them and their families, but fuck the rest of you.
Wow.
It's a not in my backyard mentality.
Not in my backyard. There was another member of the same Monterey City Council, Libby Downing, who's a nurse, and she got up and made a similar speech. She said, "I believe in medical marijuana. I have patients who have received great relief from medical marijuana where they couldn't get it in any other way, but I'll be goddamned if I'm going to turn the city of Monterey into Pot City."
Wow. 5 years ago. She didn't get reelected though, did she? Didn't she lose?
I think she is still there.
Is she?
I'm not 100% sure, but I remember the last city council meeting we attended in Monterey was maybe 2 years ago.
Yeah, she was
there. Yeah, so I don't know if she's still there, but
yeah. So these people are capable of enormous hypocrisy and hostility. And
do you think the majority of them actually believe this, or they're just saying this for their constituents so they get reelected?
I think a lot of them do believe in it. A lot of law enforcement believes in it, and the reason they believe in it is because this is how they've been trained. They've been taught that that there is no medical benefit to marijuana. They've been the training for narcotics officers in the state of California is interesting, and as a when I was a criminal defense attorney, I got into this from time to time. They're required to receive ongoing education and classes, and 90% of the classes that they attend for on narcotics are through an organization called the California Narcotics Officers Association, CNOA, and they have a website, and you can easily see their positions. Their position has been for many years that medical marijuana is a complete hoax, that there is zero medical value, and that marijuana is pure evil. And this is what they've been teaching to every police officer who has attended a class in the state of California for the last 40 years.
Wow.
Yeah.
That's a lot of education. That's hard to.
That's right.
change
So
out.
when you ask, do they really believe this? Yeah. And because they've been inundated with propaganda, and when you look at their arguments now, they're just regurgitating the propaganda.
Are there any? I know there was a group once that I bumped into called LEAP, Law Enforcement Against Prohibition. I think is what it was.
Right. These are the enlightened ones.
Right.
These are the few law enforcement people, and I think they're getting to be a larger number now, who recognize that it's the legal prohibition that creates the legal problems. The problems are created by the criminality that attends to a black market. It's not, the problems are not created by using cannabis. But if you listen carefully to their arguments, they're constantly conflating the problems caused by cannabis use with the problems caused by the cannabis black market that they've created. So if you want to get rid of the cannabis black market, the best way to do it is to make cannabis available as widely as possible. When cannabis is available as liquor is in every little store in every little town, the black market will disappear.
If you go all the way to the top, then I mean, we fight this at a local level here, and we go up to the state. But this is really a problem that's right at the federal level. I mean, this has to be descheduled before we can really start making these breakthroughs to a lot of these areas in the country where it's not legal at all.
Right.
So there's been multiple attempts throughout history for people to try to deschedule, but it never seems to really work. It never goes all the way through. I'm sure you've had plenty of time thinking about it over the years. Is a rough guess, or if you even have a plan, like what would it be to actually completely deschedule this? Like what would be the mechanisms to turn this on and to do this? Like, for example, California League of Cities, they actually teach those conferences for a lot of these cities on how to, like, whether you want to turn on or turn off cannabis operations in your area. They did one actually at the Monterey, I think it was at the Portola Plaza, or it was right down there basically on Alvarado Street. And I mean, Normal's given 2 or 3 attempts at it. I know a couple of other independent groups have tried to actually circulate petitions and stuff. But what do you think would be the most effective techniques to use to actually deschedule this at the federal level?
I think there's 2 ways. I think there's action by Congress that the president would have to sign off on, and then there's the appointment of who's the head of the DEA. Now, I just read an article this morning that Senator Cory Booker intends to introduce legislation to reschedule marijuana. And that would be great if it would pass. It's been very difficult to pass anything since the country is so divided for these last few years, though it's promising that the Farr Rohrabacher amendment was one of the few examples of bipartisan support for a bill, and that said that Department of Justice could not have any money for prosecuting medical marijuana that was legal under state laws. So you hold out hope that there could be a bipartisan support to get this through Congress. But then you turn around and you see Jeff Sessions as the Attorney General, and even though Trump campaigned on allowing states to legalize cannabis, you've got Sessions as this complete throwback.
Well, I mean, like, let's be honest, politically, how long does Jeff Sessions has in the current White House? I mean, they're dropping like flies over there. So
right.
And as far as bipartisan bills going through at this point, the way I looked at it, if you gone back in time, let's say, for example, it hadn't been Hillary, but let's say Bernie had won and gotten in, I think the Republicans would have just blocked every single move that he would have ever tried to make. And the same way the Democrats in a lot of ways are capable of shooting down the Republicans on the flip side for everything. I don't see us as a country that's coming together. I see us actually as a country that's dividing even more. The Republican Party is at war with itself internally, and the Democrats, they're technically at war with themselves, even post Hillary versus Bernie fiascos. So, I mean, as far as everybody getting together and having a good time and signing off on a piece of legislation, it's
well, I think
rough.
To go back to your question about that you asked Richard about, what is it gonna take to make it happen? I think it's kind of happening organically now because we have 28 states that have medical cannabis laws. I think there's around 9 that have recreational allowed, and so I think that's going to be what it takes. I mean, we have over the majority of the country
what's the
passing laws.
What's the magic number on states though where it actually has to go to some kind of a congressional vote to? I mean, like I remember originally back in the day before there was like 28 states where it was like quasi legal. People are like, yeah, once we get to 26, then the whole country's got to flip because
I don't have a specific number, but I just think that momentum and that continuing to happen is going to be what it takes. I mean, it's amazing to think that we have voter initiatives that are created to force the states to violate federal law, and they're passing. That's to me, that's fascinating. Or on the flip side, we have the legislation that's passing these laws because they realize that it's not right. I mean, we're all breaking federal law as openly as possible.
That's true. A weird thing though is a lot of states unfortunately don't have voter initiatives. They can't actually push that. It has to be something that gets sponsored and authored by an actual elected official.
Right.
But as far as like us putting pressure as citizens on Congress to do this, I mean, we can write all the online sign-up forms to like, hey, yeah, president, deschedule, blah, blah, blah. He doesn't have to do that. The Congress, on the other side, what do we have to do to put enough pressure on, not just I'm going to call up my representative and hustle them on the phone for 6 hours every day. It's what do we really do to get Congress to do this? And by the way, like I'm of the opinion rescheduling would be something of a step in the right direction, but I would prefer, honestly, complete descheduling. When I hear rescheduling, I just hear it saying that's going to open up for just a few people. So, for example, a lot of people were nervous if it got rescheduled, it was going to be just available to the pharmaceutical companies. Hopefully that would solve things like banking and other issues for us if we can actually use it. But I guess I want like a silver bullet. And granted, organically, this is happening as it is, but I just wish it was happening faster. And it's not that it hasn't been happening quickly. I mean, it's amazing progress over the years. And I'm sort of torn between, like, I can't believe this shit is still illegal, and at the same time, I'm amazed we've gotten as far as we have. And we have done that mostly because people are just pissed off at this entire situation. And, for example, if we go and we talk to a sheriff, and the sheriff's been indoctrinated entire career, or maybe his parents were even sheriffs, like going all the way back. What are we supposed to say to these people? And they're like, I'm just going to enforce the law the way I view it. Selectively, which is a really common thing that they like to do. So
they used to say to me and my clients in court, you may not like the law, but you have to follow it, And now that the law legalizes cannabis, they've got a completely different tune that's singing. It's, well, I don't like the law and I'm not going to enforce it that way. But it's complicated. When Obama came in, he campaigned that he was going to allow the states to permit medical marijuana, and his Attorney General Eric Holder took great steps in that direction, and a lot of progress was made in the 8 years of the Obama administration. In the last year of the administration, when the head of the DEA resigned, and he had an opportunity to appoint a new head of the DEA and really change everything with one single appointment of a reasonable person. He appointed this dickhead Chuck Rosenberg, who is an old-style war on drugs fanatic.
reefer madness all the way.
Reefer madness all the way. And, that opportunity was squandered. Within the federal law enforcement bureaucracy, they have a lot of power. They have a lot of political sway, and they use it. They have threatened. Not only the cops, the narcs who make up the DEA, but also the lawyers, the U.S. attorneys who are enforcing the law in the U.S. district courts. Have all bought into reefer madness, and they don't want to give it up. So that's the problem. On the other hand, with state initiative, voter initiatives allowing the people to speak, and almost all the early states that legalized medical marijuana did it through voter initiative. California did, and most of the other states did. It's a great historical trend. You see the people basically saying, yeah, you've been telling me that reefer madness is death for years and years, but I've been smoking pot for years and years, and I know that that's not true. I know you're lying to me. I don't believe you, and so we're going to legalize it. That's what happened. Mm-hmm. And there's no magic number for the number of states. It's not like passing a constitutional amendment, but there is a critical mass that's reached. So when you have more than half the states have legalized it, the federal government is in a position where they don't like it, and they've got a law that outlaws it, but they don't have enough cops, and they don't have enough courtrooms, and they don't have enough prosecutors to crack down on it. The enforcement of drug laws really is done in the largest part by state and local law enforcement. So The law is still on their side in a lot of ways, so that's slipping away from them. But the ability to enforce the law has gone out the window.
Mm-hmm.
You talk about law enforcement having a lot of influence. You made me think of something. There's a bill that has been gaining some momentum and attraction in Senate Bill 162. I forget who authored it, but basically it's a bill where they're attempting to essentially outlaw medical cannabis businesses from being able to brand their company or logo on things like clothing and hats and T-shirts. And a lobbyist I spoke to about this law, he said basically what you said. It's law enforcement's last hurrah of trying to really kind of stick it to this movement or just create another loophole or problem for them to have, as an industry coming up. So I think that's really interesting to think that there's, even though we've legalized it, even though we've come all this way, there's still this random, Senate Bill 162 that pops up that's saying silly things like you can't take your logo and put it on a hat and sell that to one of your customers.
Right.
So Reefer Madness is still very, very much alive.
Oh, yeah. Oh, yeah. It is. You don't have to look any further than Jeff Sessions to see that, Wouldn't it be sweet, though, if he's fired for the wrong reason, but we all benefit from it? So,
well, who does he put in place next, though?
Yeah. We don't know. Yeah. We go around saying, well, it can't be worse than Jeff Sessions, but
I'm sure they could find somebody.
If they work on it, maybe they could.
So another thing I wanted to talk to you about and ask you about is a lot of the focus right now is on the momentum of cannabis and it becoming a legitimate business and tax revenue and everything like that. But how many people do you think are still sitting in states and prisons that, got charged for a nonviolent cannabis crime and are doing years? I think that's another thing that really needs to get addressed. That's something we need to fix. Because, for example, if you're sitting in prison in California for some sort of violent cannabis crime, yet, next year I'm going to be able to go to Salinas and buy it recreationally, for example, there's something not right there.
Right.
Amnesty would be a requirement.
Yeah. See, it's not going to change with the flip of a switch. It's 2 steps forward, 1 step back. So what you have in New York right now, so New York was one of the worst states for jumping onto the war on drugs. And they had passed some horrible sentencing laws. And they locked up a lot of people. Now, what's happened over the last 15 years has caused rethinking of all of what's going on in New York. But they still have their laws on the books, but they're enforcing them differently. So the way it's come out now is if you're in New York and you're white, the police are never going to hassle you for marijuana. And if you're not white, then it's back to the war on drugs. Mm-hmm. So it's a horrible, unfair situation that's been created. It's better than it was for white people, but not for everybody else.
Oh, that's true. It's such a weird thing. Like, we would love law enforcement just to get off our case about this already, but the simple fact is the prison industrial complex is one of the things that's funding this. That's an economy in itself. That's a huge economy in this country. And per capita, we have something like more of our citizens jailed than anywhere else in the world as far as countries are concerned. It's something ridiculous like that.
I think we're 25% of the world's prison population.
Seriously?
Yeah, I'm pretty sure.
Oh my God. That's not cheap to keep people housed like animals in cages either. The simple fact that for non-violent drug-related crimes that they're getting stuck in there, that's just horrible. I would hope that there would be a pardoning or an amnesty. Obama pardoned a bunch of people on his way out the door. I wish he would just flip the switch and been like, okay, this stuff is no longer illegal, but that didn't quite happen yet in its transition.
It's happened in California, and that is that in the passage of Prop 64, it included provisions that if you had a previous conviction for 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 a cannabis-related offense, that you could now have a shortcut method for getting that record cleaned up, getting that felony reduced to a misdemeanor, getting the misdemeanor dismissed altogether. So it can be done, and we're doing it in California.
Well, what about folks that are still currently incarcerated? Are they able to do that, I guess? Have someone that can work on that for them? Do you know?
Well, in the state of California, if you qualify if you're incarcerated for those specific offenses, yeah, you can get out.
That'd be interesting. I wonder if somebody will follow that and start picking up the data from that. I wonder how many people are getting their felonies expunged or the record cleaned because of that. That'd be an interesting statistic to know.
Right. So the people who are doing the most of that are the large public defender offices, Los Angeles and San Francisco and Alameda County, places like that. And I mean, if you wanted to know, they would have the data on that.
Yeah, that's a good idea. I'm actually going to try to follow up on that. That'd be really interesting to know. But so recently, you're still somewhat involved in the cannabis industry. I know you still talk to other attorneys around here that are family friends and things like that, so you keep up with what's happening. But nowadays, you're kind of enjoying the retired life. You enjoy playing music.
Right.
What has that been like to kind of go from the courtroom to the harmonica?
Yeah, so this beats the hell out of working. Getting up and being in court at 8 o'clock every morning. This is, for me, it's been wonderful. I'm still interested in what's going on here, but I'm no longer licensed to practice law, so I can't go to court even if I wanted to. I can't represent anybody even if I wanted to, and I'm happy to let other people do that, but I want them to do it right.
So what do you do with music exactly? Do you play instruments? Do you write songs? What is it you do?
Yeah, so I'm doing a couple of different things. I play harmonica and I sing and I write songs. I'm involved in a couple of different bands. Right now I'm involved in a recording project, recording some original songs. We're in the middle of doing that. This last weekend, I played with one band at a fundraiser in Marina, Spectre Dance, and I played with a different band, the band that I played with at Monday Night Dinner, Pat Clark, at a private party.
I've heard you actually play at the Cachagua family store back in the day when it was still open. Yeah, twice.
Yeah.
It was pretty good.
Thanks. And we have a show called Dylan and Dylan that combines the music of Bob Dylan and the poetry of Dylan Thomas. And we've just been asked by the Henry Miller Library to perform for them in September on a program that they're planning. So we're looking forward to that.
Do you guys have any songs about cannabis? Just curious.
So there are many songs about cannabis. I have an iTunes collection, that I kind of created on cannabis songs. I mean, if you wanted to just hear, smoke 2 joints in the morning, and I'm working on a song called California Sober, and I've got some friends now who are in AA, in Alcoholics Anonymous, because alcohol has been destructive to their lives and their families, but they want to continue to smoke pot because they don't see that as being so destructive, and this is a debate that's going on within AA. Can you do that? Can you say that you're sober if you're still smoking pot, but you're sworn off alcohol? So I call that California Sober, and
gotcha.
We're gonna solve for that.
That's actually kind of cool. That's a good idea. I don't know what. That's an interesting question. I've heard people pose that question. You know, like can you get off of one substance but have cannabis? I mean, some people claim that an opiate addiction and heroin, people get off of that thanks to cannabis. I don't know whether that's true or not. I don't know the statistics on it, but I've seen and read about that many different times. So that's definitely a hot topic about cannabis being a gateway drug away from the bad drugs.
Yeah. So the opioid question is huge. If you listen to Jeff Sessions, marijuana leads directly to heroin and opioid addiction. We know that's nonsense, and the statistics that have been collected recently are showing that in the states where you have medical marijuana, you have a very noticeable reduction in the usage of opioids, which is an improvement on so many levels, and that you also see reduction in the use of alcohol, which is also an improvement.
I think Colorado recently had more tax generated from cannabis sales than alcohol, which was like the first time in history or something at least for Colorado. I don't know about any other place, but
I think that they were worried that people would continue to drink as heavily as they do, and then just add pot on top of it, and it would it'd make people crazy, and which I think it could. But I don't think that that's what's happening. I think the larger trend is substitution, and I think that's beneficial for the individuals and for society.
Right, it really is. I mean, what's your stance on the war on drugs in general? Do you think we should just wipe clean with all of it, or is it just legalize cannabis and everything else is bad? I mean, what's your idea on how, if you were in control of the system, or you were, how would you fix that, or what would your opinion be on that?
Well, I distinguish cannabis from meth and heroin and other drugs, because I think that the harm that's caused by meth and heroin is substantial and well documented and devastating, potentially devastating. And when you look at those same issues on cannabis, those downsides don't exist. You don't have people dying of overdoses of cannabis. You don't have people throwing their lives away. You don't have people starting fights like you do with alcohol. So I don't think that all of the arguments in favor of cannabis and against the war on cannabis apply equally to all other drugs. Though you look at what they're doing in Portugal, and it's my understanding that they've basically legalized all drug usage, and that there's been widespread improvement in the problems, not only in getting rid of the black market problems,
right,
but in the personal use problems that are caused. And then I loop back to the arguments made by law enforcement, local law enforcement, especially. Whenever they argue about the problems caused by cannabis, and when they for zoning and land use regulation, it has to be reasonable, which means that it has to be data based and provable that it is something that threatens the health, safety, and welfare of the people. And you can certainly make a case that alcohol threatens health, safety, and welfare. And but when you get to cannabis, I defy them to come up with problems caused by cannabis consumption that threaten health, safety, and welfare, as opposed to problems caused by making cannabis a black market item and having the criminality and the profit of the black market causing the problems.
Yeah, no, that's huge, especially when you consider the banking problem that cannabis has. We're forced to deal with cash, which creates a whole other problem in and of itself. A black market item that has to deal with cash is forced to deal with cash. they, like you said, they lump a lot of those problems all into cannabis itself, but it's not actual consumption that's creating that.
Right. It's the prohibition that creates
Right.
the problem.
It's the system around
So a great lesson for anybody making policy in this area is to study the alcohol prohibition movement in the United States that existed in the 1920s, and the way that fueled and profited organized crime, and how that part of the problem disappeared when alcohol was legalized.
Well, I know we're going to be wrapping up in a second, but let's talk a little bit about the price of cannabis and taxation of cannabis. What do you feel like, or rather, how long do you think it would take for this to kind of start stabilizing? Will we ever see the day where there's a $1 pound? Will that day happen? Will we ever see a day where cannabis is taxed at a reasonable rate? Or do you think it's going to take a long time?
So what is the cost of growing a pound of cannabis? I've heard that it's about $1.50.
It could be.
I mean, if you're just dropping it into the ground and you had soil and dirt and sunlight and just let nature do its course, maybe.
No, I'm talking about large scale, economy of scale farming. I mean,
yeah. Right now, I think
the tax issues are interesting. A lot of the counties and cities are trying to pile on taxes as high as they can. But if you think about this, there are 58 counties in California. If some of them have really high taxes and some of them have really low taxes, well, aren't the businesses going to gradually end up in the counties that have lower taxes?
And quickly,
and aren't the high tax counties going to lose out? And if you want to promote a business, particularly a new business that's trying to get established and has a lot of startup costs, don't you want to give them some tax benefits?
Yes.
Right. Well, and it goes back to what you said about trying to fight against the black market. We're not going to fight against the black market if we're being charged $15 a square foot.
Yeah. Well, and the higher, they can tax this so much and make the price so high that it opens up an opportunity for a black market to undercut them.
Right.
Which is surprising because the cost of the black market should be higher than the free market, but taxation can turn that on its head.
Mm-hmm. And I know there's talks, with the county to potentially lower these taxes. We're seeing different areas come online that have better taxes, which is helping out our argument to lower the taxes. So I think it'll happen over time. It's all incremental. All this policy stuff, like you said, doesn't just happen overnight. It's not a flip of a switch. So over time, I think we'll get there. But it's still interesting to talk about and see what's really going to happen with all of this.
Yeah, I've heard that the big time growers who are wanting to grow in Monterey County like it because of the so-called unique climate that they've got. That they've got sun, but it's not too hot because they've got the coastal breezes, and that this is the right combination for growing on a large scale economically. But I've also heard that it's a weed and it grows everywhere. And if it grows is there really such an advantage in the climate of Monterey County that they can charge higher taxes and get away with it without driving the business out? What do you think?
No.
No.
No, I think most people came to Monterey County because it switched. It seemed overnight because a lot of years it was come on vacation, leave on probation is what Monterey County was known as. And now all of a sudden they're allowing for all license types that the state just opened up for. That's like, let's get there and get set up. I think that's what attracted more people. Not to say that Monterey County is not great and doesn't have a good infrastructure and all that, but more than anything, it was they opened up first. I think what really led to a lot of people sitting up here. And they had all these huge properties that were basically ready to cultivate right away in so many ways. So that's really what did it. And Ryan, as he says, as these other cities and counties come online, people are going to go jurisdiction shopping. They're going to go
Yeah,
somewhere else.
That's pretty much what happened. Why there was so many growers up in the north. Honestly, it's because that was more permissible to be up there in the Emerald Triangle for a long time, and it did. It just flipped in this area, and that's why suddenly everybody flooded here. As far as the climate, yeah, we got great climate, but there are other counties that also have amazing climates. Jurisdiction shopping, it is.
Right.
Yeah.
Well, that's pretty much all we got for now, Richard. We do this usually for about an hour, and it was great talking to you. I loved getting your insight on what it was like to, be on that side for so many years, and now we get to kind of enjoy what's going to happen and keep fighting the good fight. So is there anything else that you have to say or anything with your music that's going on or coming up soon that we can share?
We're going to be doing Dylan and Dylan, I think September 9th at the Henry Miller Library, which has been relocated from Big Sur to the Barnyard because of the Pfeiffer Bridge. So come on down.
Awesome.
Anything else, Ryan?
I honestly thank you for everything you did for so many years as a lawyer in this county, because there's just a lot of places you've been where there weren't people actually doing what they should have been doing, and the fact that you were here through all of this is just historically awesome for us. So thank you for that.
Well, you're welcome. I feel lucky that I was able to do it.
Good.
All right. That was another episode of the $1 Pound Show. We'll see you guys next time, and smoke them if you got them.
Peace.
Thanks so much for listening to this episode of the $1 Pound Podcast with your hosts, Ryan and Joey, online at $1pound.com. We'll catch you next time.